Spinosaurus means spined lizard, and it was first discovered around 100 years ago in Egypt. Spinosaurus kind of looked like a giant crocodile with a big sail-like fin on its back that could extend 7 feet or 2 meters down the length of its body. Scientists believe this sail could have either been a way for Spinosaurus to ward off enemies as well as attract a mate. According to National Geographic, Spinosaurus was a giant swimming dinosaur, the first known. It had paddle-like feet and nostrils at the top of its head, like a crocodile, and they allowed it to swim on the surface very easily, and also to submerge itself. Its head was also very similar to a crocodile's. It had long, slender jaws and cone-shaped teeth. Scientists believe it was pretty bad at getting around on land and spent most of its time in the water, in rivers. Spinosaurus was known to have eaten giant prey like sharks, as well as crocodile-looking creatures. If Spinosaurus hadn't gone extinct, it would have undoubtedly disrupted ecosystems that included crocodiles. Seeing as the first fossil of a Spinosaurus was found in Egypt, the Nile would have been one of the places it lived. Spinosaurus was known to have inhabited North African swamps and rivers, which happens to also be an area infested with crocodiles today. Crocodiles are also very ancient creatures that were alive during the Cretaceous period, but strangely enough, they did not go extinct when the massive KT extinction took place. So why is this? Well, there's a few theories, but the main theory is they were very well adapted. Crocodiles haven't changed much in their 200 million years of existence. They dwelled in the water and were cold-blooded. They would have been able to go long periods of time without eating prey, unlike dinosaurs. Additionally, crocodiles grow a lot more slowly than dinosaurs. Mammals were able to survive the mass extinction because they were smaller. Same goes for crocodiles. But if Spinosaurus hadn't gone extinct, crocodiles would have a pretty big problem on their hands. Spinosaurus, because of how big it was, had virtually no predators to worry about. Crocodiles would have had to compete with Spinosaurus for food. Either that or they would have become food themselves. One of the reasons why crocodiles survived the KT extinction is because they were likely a lot smaller 65 million years ago and could survive by eating smaller prey. It can be said that if Spinosaurus didn't go extinct, crocodiles might have. Either that or crocodiles might have evolved to be land dwellers, not water dwellers. We know that Spinosaurus was adapted for being in the water, even though it could go on land as well. But on land, it moved around quite clumsily. If crocodiles had existed at the same time as them, they may have ventured out of the water away from Spinosaurus. In modern day, there might be huge land-dwelling crocodiles that feasted on small mammals instead of fish like they normally do. This would wreak havoc on the ecosystem and would completely change the types of creatures we currently see in northern Africa. Any creatures that dwelled on the ground would be at risk. Back to Spinosaurus though, if they hadn't gone extinct, Egyptian history might actually be completely different, and perhaps ancient Egyptian civilization would not have taken the same shape. Egypt relied on the Nile. I mean, Egypt was in the desert. The Nile was the source of all life in this area. But if huge Spinosauruses were lurking in the waters of the Nile, those pharaoh boat rides Cleopatra went on with the Roman Emperor Caesar wouldn't have taken place. We would have seen ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs depicting Spinosaurus being captured or killed by Egyptians. Who knows if ancient Egyptian culture would have even evolved the way it did. Without the Nile, it might not even exist. Moving into modern day, if Spinosaurus was still around, perhaps poachers would have wanted to hunt it down for its fin, selling them on the black market to be made into purses or shoes, much like how crocodiles are hunted for their hide to make shoes, purses, and other goods. This may have driven Spinosaurus to the brink of extinction anyway. Don't you just love humans?
So the Mosasaurus are actually related to the Komodo dragon. However, unlike Komodos, Mosasauruses, or is it Mosasauri? If you guys know the plural of this dinosaur, let me know in the comments down below, but we'll just say Mosasauruses, I guess. Either way guys, Mosasauruses had flippers which helped them swim. In fact, their build resembles that of a mix of a shark, a snake, and a dolphin, as well as a lizard, I guess. Reaching lengths surpassing 50 feet with double-hinged jaws like snakes, these things would swallow their prey whole most of the time. Now, there are different kinds of Mosasauruses, with the largest one reaching lengths of approximately 57 feet. On average, they would only grow to about 20 to 30 feet in length, which is still quite large. Their diet consisted of fish, smaller Mosasauruses, sharks, as well as other aquatic creatures. The interesting thing about these guys is that they actually weren't fish. They were aquatic reptiles and used their flippers to swim, but needed to come up from the water for air. Their skin was scaly like that of a snake, but they had shark-like tails and were double-colored, with their stomachs usually white and their backs usually black. Their mouth has rows of teeth, but the scariest feature would be the teeth protruding from the roof of the animal's mouth. And in regards to their body, well, they were quite long and thick, weighing on average about 30,000 pounds. So now that we know how terrifying these creatures were, if they were alive today, where would they live? Well, given the fact that these fossils have been found around the coast of North America as well as the western coast of Europe, well, I think we have our answer. These things would mostly reside along the US coast and Canadian coast, but could also be found along the coasts of Spain, the UK, France, Portugal, and Ireland. Now, of course, we can't forget back when these things did exist, the world didn't look the way it currently does. There's a lot more dry land and the oceans weren't shaped the way they currently are. This is why some fossils of this creature have been found in the likes of Nebraska and South Dakota in the United States, and Centre-Val de Loire in France. What may seem like the middle of the country was once actually a coastline where these things apparently lived. So with these things living along the east coast of North America, possibly South America, as well as the west coast of Europe and maybe even Africa, what does that mean? First things first, Miami Beach is no longer a solid vacation spot during Canadian winters. These things would make a meal out of any human that came remotely close to it, no problem. It wouldn't even have to bite us, simply just swallow us whole the way a blue whale could. Of course, marine life in the shallow parts of the Atlantic Ocean would see a significant decline, considering how we now have another species similar to that of great white sharks roaming around. We may even see a significant decrease in some sharks due to the fact that Mosasauruses included them in their diet. As with every animal both on land and in the water, we'd simply find a way to coexist among these things. They wouldn't be hungry only for humans, although again, it wouldn't be very wise to go for a swim in the Atlantic. Now with that being said, I could promise you the water was much different back then compared to now. In fact, researchers believe our oceans were twice as salty as they are now, so who knows if this thing would be able to live in our current waters. This is another factor we need to take into consideration. Back when the dinos roamed the land, there was a lot more oxygen on Earth, and overall it was a much younger planet. Tens and hundreds of millions of years later, these things probably wouldn't be able to sustain themselves the way they did way back then. Now, I'm not saying that they wouldn't survive, but who knows how long they would last. Of course, if they did find that the ocean water was too salty, it's possible that these things moved to smaller bodies of water, lakes, or rivers. Regardless, wherever these things decide was an appropriate habitat that they'd settle in, one thing is for sure, the marine life in that area would drop significantly. As is the case when any new species is introduced to the well-oiled working machine that is the ecosystem, regardless if it's on land or the water. The population of one or multiple species see a decline, which inevitably leads to an increase in other populations who are no longer being eaten as frequently. So to wrap this one up, if the Mosasaurus was alive today, it would most likely live along the east coast of North America or the west coast of Europe. However, depending on how they find the waters, they may all migrate to another body of water more suitable for them. Wherever it is they decide to settle, the area's ecosystem would be all out of whack, but as is always the case with Mother Nature, it'd find a way to balance itself out. In regards to how these things would affect us as a society, well, we wouldn't be able to enjoy beaches as frequently, or we'd have to do so while being hyper aware of our surroundings. Similar to that of sharks, I don't think the Mosasaurus would necessarily stop us from using the water altogether, but if we were to see one near shore, we'd certainly want to clear the waters. Another important note to mention, who knows what medicinal properties these things could also be holding. Maybe their glands heal cancer, maybe their skin is an anti-inflammatory. Of course, this is wishful thinking, but hey, we wouldn't know until we captured and studied them, which would also happen because we're human and we need to know everything about everything.
It takes a special friend.
Willie doesn't have a problem with me. We appreciate each other.
We all love whales, right? Free Willy, 1, 2, and 3? Well, maybe not 3, but generally the ocean is a much more interesting place just by adding whales. Killer whales, humpback whales, blue whales, even narwhals. They're huge, they're lovable, and they sing some really nice songs. Well, let's meet the most frightening whale of all time, the Basilosaurus, aka the king lizard. How's that for a nickname? And what if we do away with the whole extinction thing and imagine an ocean where the king lizard is still floating about, doing its thing, living it up as the lord of the whales? Now, that's where things get interesting, because the ocean would instantly become a much, much scarier place, as if it's not already. The Basilosaurus existed during the late Eocene period between 34 to 40 million years ago and was initially thought to be some sort of reptile, hence the whole saurus thing. Scientists quickly backtracked on that and rightfully crowned the king lizard as a marine mammal due to its complex molar teeth, a trait found only in mammals and not reptiles. Now, it didn't get its nickname for being a great chess player. The Basilosaurus was estimated to measure between 24 to 30 meters long. That's bigger than a London double-decker bus, and also the same size as the current biggest whale in the world, the blue one. Because of this, we've got to imagine what the whale world would look like if the king lizard was still around. Research has shown that the Basilosaurus was incredibly predatory, and it also had the tools to back it up. Researchers found that a fully grown Basilosaurus could bite with a force of over 3,600 pounds at the position of its upper third premolar, about the same weight as a 1985 El Camino. This was enough to penetrate through skin, muscle, and bone, and pretty much crack open the skull of anything that lived in the ocean. Scientists also found that the king lizard attacked its prey pretty similar to crocodiles. They discovered that the Basilosaurus could grip its victims with over 2,300 pounds of force, then toss it back along its jaws for a devastating final chomp. This guy was an incredibly capable hunter, pretty much the T-Rex of the ocean, and it's fairly safe to say that the peace-loving, krill-eating blue whale would probably be easy pickings for the Basilosaurus. In modern science, there's actually been cases of killer whales hunting them down in packs, which begs the question, how would the Basilosaurus fit into that equation? There are two possible scenarios that we can see. The first one would see the Basilosaurus snacking on blue whale just the same as a lion takes down a buffalo. You see, it'd be a fairly easy fight for the king lizard, and it's down to one thing. The blue whale haven't got any teeth. Instead, they have what's called baleen plate, which essentially makes them giant sieves that swim through the ocean, catching whatever's unfortunate enough to stumble into the blue whale's path. And as we've said before, the Basilosaurus has got a lot of teeth. It wouldn't even be a fair fight. The blue whale would quickly become a thing of the past, and the king lizard would take the crown as the biggest boy in the deep blue sea. But there's also a flip side to this. Why would the Basilosaurus expend all its energy on a blue whale when they're pretty much the exact same size as each other? That's a lot of work for some lunch. Which leads us to our second scenario, the Basilosaurus versus the killer whale. Whereas the orca are smart, intelligent creatures, the king lizard was a relatively simple beast. It had one design: kill things and eat them. Compared to the killer whale though, it didn't have thousands of years of evolution on its side. And whereas killer whales used sophisticated echolocation to overcome obstacles, the Basilosaurus could only hear directionally in water, which is kind of like having an Xbox One but no controller to play it with. And as we've said before, if the killer whale can take down a blue whale, it's plausible that they'd also try and go for the Basilosaurus. What we'd see is the equivalent of a pack of timber wolves facing off against a T-Rex, but in the ocean. The deep blue sea would quickly become a battleground, with both sides of the whale war stockpiling for dominance. Fishing would become an even deadlier job than it is now. They'd be hailed as danger-loving heroes who braved the Basilosaurus sea. The price of tuna and salmon would skyrocket, and only millionaires would be able to afford sushi. Whale spotting would be outlawed for fear of death. Cruise ships would quickly become an adrenaline-fueled vacation rather than a relaxing holiday. Japan's tie on the whaling industry would quickly become forgotten, and anti-whaling campaigners would rejoice. Why would anyone attempt to fish for whale when there's a good chance that you'd run into a Basilosaurus? Yeah, didn't think so. With this constant whale battle raging on, overfishing would become a thing of the past. The planet's marine population would eventually return to an equal balance, and more importantly, humanity would probably think twice before exploiting the ocean again. Everyone's a winner.
Basically, this thing is the oldest known living monitor lizard. These are some massive lizards that we see walking around today. You know, like the Komodo dragon, the big drooling monstrosity that has a type of venom in its jaws. It can bite you and you'll slowly die over the course of 3 days. Jesus, that sounds like it came right out of a monster movie. So now that we have a general idea of what this creature looks like, it's a big scary lizard with some massive teeth in its head, but just how big is it? Well, there's a lot of debate on this topic. Like a lot of fossils, it can be hard to determine the exact size of these creatures because it can be hard to find a complete set of fossils. So I will give you a range. Some people think this lizard could have been around 3 meters long. That's around 10 feet. That's a massive lizard. It would take down Shaq for a snack and it wouldn't even look bloated after it ate him. But other people think that this beast could have been 11 meters long. That's insane. Are you serious? For anyone who uses the imperial system, that clocks in at around 36 feet from head to tail. Just so you guys have a visual, that's about as tall as a telephone pole. And because I like to take things to the extreme on this channel, we're gonna say that this thing is as big as the larger number. Now, what did megalania feed on? Well, back then animals were much bigger, so it probably had a diet very close to the diet it has now. Hunting down and killing large mammals, or using a classic vulture technique of finding something that is already dead and chowing down. Why go after an animal that can run away when there's perfectly good rotting flesh waiting for you in the sun? I heard the maggots give it an extra kick. It's also thought that megalania had venom similar to the one that is present in the Komodo dragon. That is terrifying. You have a beast that is as big as a semi-trailer, and it also has jaws that are full of a poisonous toxin. Even though we're in quarantine right now, remember, it could have been much worse. You could have been alive when megalania was walking around, ripping cows in half with just a look. Now, how does this venom work? Well, for a long time, scientists thought that there was no venom in a Komodo dragon, that it was just the fact that the Komodo dragon had so much bacteria in its mouth from eating rotting flesh and just being an all-around dirty dude that they would bite an animal, the bite would get infected, and the animal would die over the course of 3 days from the infection. During this time, the Komodo dragon would follow it and wait patiently for the prey to collapse. But it turns out that the Komodo dragon actually does have venom. That venom is a hemotoxin, which stops the animal's blood from clotting. So the Komodo dragon will bite viciously onto this creature, tear open a hole, and it will bleed out. And megalania had the ability to do the exact same thing. So what would it look like if this creature never went extinct? I mean, some people are probably watching this video and thinking that the world would be a very scary place. These things are almost like dinosaurs walking around. They would be terrorizing everyone and we would be in a constant battle with them. But personally, I don't think that would be the case. Just like every other predator on the planet, we would most likely dominate them. These ones would maybe take a little bit more technology and a lot more elbow grease, but so far nothing has been able to stand up to the human race, and I don't think that these creatures would be any different. I'm confident in saying we would be able to control these beasts because there are some people who believe we might have been the ones who killed them off originally, after the discovery was made that megalania lived as recently as 50,000 years ago, meaning that there would have been some crossover with humans and megalania, which sounds like it would have been the worst time to be alive, but not for us, for megalania. Some people speculate that this creature went extinct because of us. It was big and threatening and a lot of food, and humans back then were very handy at grouping up and killing things. Who am I kidding? We're very handy at doing that right now. So if these things existed now, there would most likely be a few walking around in the wild, but there would be for sure some in cages. Which brings me to the Tiger King theory. If megalania was still alive right now, there would be a good chance that the documentary Tiger King would have been about a whole different group of people who collect a whole different kind of animal. If megalania was real, we would see super rich people who own massive plots of land just so they could have one of these things walking around in their backyard. Just like the Tiger King, there would be a massive underground world of people who buy, sell, and trade megalania. People would take pictures with these massive monsters, they would ride them, they would breed them. The market would be huge and most likely very illegal. My guess is that the people involved would be some of the wealthiest in the world. That's simply because these things would be so much harder to keep as pets. They'd be extremely expensive. Forget how much it costs to feed a tiger. These things would probably eat 8 tigers a day just to keep going. It would be superstars, famous athletes, and billionaires who get into the megalania game. Jeff Bezos would have 6 of these things and each one would be in a different color. The eggs alone would be worth millions of dollars and they would probably be the size of a teenager. This means we could see a breakout situation like in Jurassic Park, but with them already running around the world, I don't think it would be too hard to contain that situation if it happened. I would imagine with this creature's size and age that it would most likely be endangered. It would be a struggle for it to find enough food because of its size, and like most other endangered animals, it would most likely be poached. That would be another element to the criminal world surrounding these creatures. Something that seems so deadly would now become a trophy for people to fluff their egos. Whenever there's something big and bad in the world, humans want to master it in every way. It doesn't matter if it's sharks, tigers, rhinos, or anything else, people will want to kill it. Black market trade for megalania teeth, skin, bones, genitals, and eggs would be crazy. People would make crazy dishes out of all the parts of its bodies, the same way we have shark fin soup. Other people would use the teeth in the way we use rhino horn. Maybe it would be an aphrodisiac or something to give eternal life. All of these would be fake, but people would buy into it. I know that the whole outlook is very bleak, but it's most likely true. For some reason, whenever humans find a big scary creature, they want to own it in every way possible, and I don't think our ancient Komodo dragon friend would be any different. This massive predator who ran the show would now be a commodity to be traded, consumed, and gawked at. On the bright side, this might open the door to scientific communities. Having a beast around that is over 1 million years old and still walking the earth could unlock so many doors to our planet's history. Maybe through the DNA of this ancient creature, we could develop a whole bunch of new medicines and understand our own genome to a greater level. Maybe we would be able to find a place for these massive reptiles to live in peace and outside of our influence. Oh, and I forgot to mention that these beasts probably would only be in Australia, unless someone snuck one out into another part of the world, which I guess they could do if they had the money, but the bulk of them would be stuck on that continent because that is where they originated from. So that would mean that Australia would have even more terrifying creatures walking around it. Oh god, I would hate to be a kangaroo in the timeline where megalania was still alive. There would be nowhere you could go to hop and stay safe.
Tylosaurus was identified and named during a period of time in which 2 researchers were constantly battling with each other. Because of this, the exact reasoning behind the name has been lost in time, but we do know that it's also known as a knob lizard. What a name, right? This long and deadly fellow is a mosasaur, with brethren in the modern monitor lizards and snakes. Dominant during the late Cretaceous period, the Tylosaurus is considered the predator of the seas at the time, much like how the T-Rex was the land predator of its time. These monsters could grow up to 15 meters long, complete with muscular, vertically flattened tails to assist in moving extremely quickly through the water. While large when viewed from the side, they had a very slender profile from the front, making them much more hydrodynamic and, as such, better hunters. By using their tail to accelerate quickly and their paddle-like limbs to steer, there weren't many creatures the Tylosaurus couldn't sneak up on and devour. They had a long, cylindrical snout with plenty of pointy, cone-shaped teeth. This snout would be used to locate prey, and once said prey was in their jaws, it would be swallowed whole. Now, the Tylosaurus didn't take any chances with its food. It had not one, but 2 extra rows of teeth on the roof of its mouth to ensure that its victims stayed snagged. No swimming away from that. Another technique used to ensure the docility of prey was one that required the use of the previously mentioned muscular tail. If you look closely at the snout, you'll notice that the front is largely toothless and seemingly reinforced. The Tylosaurus would propel itself from below and ram into its intended prey, stunning it. Once the prey was incapacitated by this blind side smash, the predatory mosasaur would then gulp it down, no problem. Delicious. All this talk of prey must be getting you pretty curious, huh? So what did the Tylosaurus eat? Well, the real question should be, what didn't it eat? This thing primarily dined on fish, but was not too picky. Remains of seabirds, sharks, plesiosaurs, and other mosasaurs had been found in the stomachs of Tylosaurus, meaning that it likely took what it could get. Some think that most of the meals it enjoyed that weren't fish were sort of accidental, like if a land-based dinosaur drowned and was found by the underwater beast. The sharks and other mosasaurs weren't primetime prey either. It's likely that Tylosaurus would target these other predators in order to remove competition from their hunting grounds. You can't have too many predators in one area, it just doesn't work like that. So in addition to eating just about anything, they were also ruthless, ensuring that their space was just that, theirs. Speaking of their space, these lengthy lizard lads lived largely around the western interior seaway, which is around the central portion of the US and Canada these days. So if they didn't go extinct, then they would have to find a new place to call home. But how cool would it be if they were just chilling in some of the more densely populated western areas? Now that we've got the rundown on Tylosaurus, we can return to the original question. What if it didn't go extinct? First of all, it would totally change the underwater food chain. Being 15 meters long, quick, and willing to eat almost anything, it's likely that the Tylosaurus would take over at the top. Sharks would battle valiantly, but it's hard to imagine many fanged fishies taking down the Tylosaurus. So we'd see some differences in apex predator rankings and even potentially see some species go extinct, either being hunted down to nothing or being out-hunted and starving. It's a fish-eat-fish world out there, folks. Brutal. Speaking of usurping sharks, we'd definitely dedicate a whole week to these scary mother truckers. Shark Week who? We're into Tylosaurus time period now. I know it's not as snappy, but come on, how cool would it be to have folks make all sorts of TV shows about these monsters? I'd watch it for sure, and if you wouldn't, you're lying. Of course, getting attention at the same level as Shark Week leads to other things too. Tylosaurus toys would be made, Tylosaurus toddler t-shirts, all sorts of merchandise would be on its way to market, because that's just what we do. The shark's time in the sun is over now. Long live the Tylo. I could even see a tune akin to Baby Shark becoming a worldwide phenomenon. Somebody would just have to come up with a cool nickname for the Tylosaurus to make it catchier. Who remembers Left Shark from the Super Bowl? We could have Left Tylosaurus instead. Maybe I'm taking this idea too far, but if this beast did exist today, you can bet people would be going nuts for it. It is too cool to deny. Maybe too cool for its own good. Just like how many sharks are endangered, it is very possible that the Tylosaurus could suffer from the same fate. Being hunted for specific body parts, getting snagged in fishing nets, having prey overfished by people, and going hungry. That's the problem with being a large predator in the same era as humans. Humans tend to mess everything up for you. At that point, it's sink or swim, hunt or be hunted. Maybe the Tylosaurus could develop some traits that would make it a true apex predator. Maybe it ascends from the water and exacts revenge on humanity. Or maybe it just chills and accepts its fate.
Standing at about 115 feet in height and about 50 feet in length, including its tail, the Gorosaurus is quite literally the definition of a beast or monster. Weighing 8,000 tons, there really wouldn't be much to rival this prehistoric creature. With the scaly skin similar to that of an alligator, a spike on its tail, triangular plates going down its back, and strong legs, this thing is a mini Godzilla. Of course, it depends which version we're talking about here. In King Kong Escapes, the Gorosaurus was 35 meters in height, only slightly larger than Kong. Yet, in Destroy All Monsters, the Gorosaurus stands about 50 meters in height, which is comparable to Godzilla. What I can say for sure is that regardless of this thing's exact height and size, it's big. It's very, very big. Not something a regular gun would be able to take down if you were to cross its path. Although the Gorosaurus is quite large and very strong, it seems its weakness comes from a lack of a ranged attack. If this thing is close enough to its target, it can bite, claw, kick, stomp, use its tail to whip. This guy's dangerous. It also does something called the kangaroo kick, where the Gorosaurus will use its tail as a springboard, leaning all its weight back and then shooting up towards its target with both feet parallel. Yet if you get far enough from the Gorosaurus, it isn't very effective. Its lack of speed is also seen as a disadvantage, but the fact that this thing towers over anything and everything, well, it wouldn't be hard for it to spot a target. So now that we're very aware that this thing is larger than life and incredibly dangerous, where would it live? In King Kong Escapes, Gorosaurus lives on Mondo Island. Of course, this is a fictional island, but we're talking about a fictional dinosaur here, so this is the island where it would live, which is just off the coast of Australia. However, in both King Kong Escapes and Destroy All Monsters, both Mondo Island and Monster Island are located on an island in the South Pacific Ocean. This island is known as the home to many monsters, including King Kong, Godzilla, Mothra, and of course Gorosaurus, among others. Now there are two ways we could continue on from here. We can either go the route that all these monsters do exist if the Gorosaurus existed, which would change life as we know it. Although the monsters reside here and are being held captive thanks to a state-of-the-art security system, we need to figure out where they came from and what their purpose is. These monsters wouldn't be much of a threat to society unless someone were to set them free, which actually did happen in the film Destroy All Monsters, when aliens invaded the Earth and used mind control tactics on the monsters to wreak havoc. But if we simply had an island of monsters and aliens didn't invade Earth trying to take over by using mind control to get the aid of these monsters, well, what would that mean? Quite simply, we'd all be okay. These things are on a remote island, which is being protected by the highest level of security out there. We're talking way more secure than Area 51. Not much of a change in regards to our day-to-day lives, but still, studying these monsters and figuring out where they came from would certainly be history in the making. Now on the flip side, if this monster was alone on this island and there weren't a ton of other monsters, again, not much of a threat to us as a society. I don't think this thing would have a good time swimming, considering how it has T-Rex arms. But again, we'd need to figure out where this thing came from and what its deal is. Did we possibly just discover a dinosaur that somehow survived extinction? Meaning this thing is possibly 100 million years old? Or was this thing born more recently, maybe in a dinosaur egg that was somehow preserved and hatched millions of years later? As you can see, again, not a very realistic answer. Could this be an alien monster of some kind? After years and endless amounts of taxpayers' dollars spent, we may never get the answer we'd be so desperately looking for. Of course, considering how this thing would be found on a remote island, again, not much of a threat to anyone except those who are brave enough to go see it. You can be sure the government would take full control over the island and would study the animal like no other. Or should I say monster. Either way, one thing is for sure, if the Gorosaurus was real, it wouldn't look like any King Kong or Godzilla movies you've seen, where this thing simply just starts knocking down skyscrapers and destroying everything and everyone. Nah, this thing would be stuck on this little island with who knows what other animals. I mean, considering its size, it'd be very tough to please an appetite if you're stuck hunting monkeys or leopards or whatever animals would be on this remote island. The Gorosaurus may even end up living a very short-lived life due to a lack of nutrition and food. For such a big monster to live on such a small island, well, there's only so many natural resources available. Again, in a controlled government environment, they would most likely supplement the monster with food, try to understand its habits, and who knows, maybe even try to train it and use it as a weapon. Although, I don't know who'd be brave enough to even try and train this thing in the first place. Either way, guys, to wrap up, if the Gorosaurus was real, it certainly wouldn't destroy the world. It'd either live on a remote island in the South Pacific, just off the coast of Australia alone, or with a ton of other monsters that seemingly appeared out of thin air yet somehow coexist. What I can confirm is that regardless if there was an island with just one monster or dozens, I don't think the human race would take it very well. Imagine watching TV and then breaking news interrupts your programming just to tell you that there is a 115-foot tall dinosaur living on a remote island near Australia. I mean, even if you were living in Canada or the US, the furthest from Australia because, you know, the Earth's flat, I feel like you'd still be freaking out. Are there more of these things? Can it fly? Where did it come from? So many questions with no answers. And that, my friend, is a recipe for anxiety. But as previously mentioned, I think we'd be okay. The Gorosaurus wouldn't destroy Earth and the human race. And hey, like I always say, if your problem is really that big of a problem, just nuke it.
Its name means tearing lizard, which is pretty wicked if you ask me. How many other creatures do you know that are named after the act of pulling or ripping something to pieces or apart with force? Absolutely powerful. The name was given to the Dacosaurus by Friedrich August von Quellstedt, who is also the owner of an excellent name. less violent in origin though. Years later it got an updated name and still sticks to this day, likely because it's super recognizable and therefore memorable. Around 2005, a new nearly complete skull fossil was discovered and it caused a ruckus in the paleontology world. New models of the skull were made and it was found to be particularly deep in shape. And the shape reminded folks of a famous fictional monster from the sea who shoots lasers and levels Japan from time to time. Yeah, you got it. Godzilla. Hell yeah. This beastly boy operated in the late Jurassic era all the way through to the early Cretaceous. That's some longevity. And once you hear about how it's classified, you'll understand how this is possible. The Dacosaurus was a giant aquatic crocodile measuring up to 5 meters. Wait, a crocodile? But you said it was a saurus! This is true, but it does bear some resemblance to a mosasaur, but in its blood and bones, it knows it's a croc. For whatever reason, this sea croc was only partially adapted to the watery lifestyle though. That Godzilla dome we mentioned earlier bears resemblance to that of terrestrial dinosaurs, and its flippers were pretty clumsy, almost as if they were leg-like. Add in some immense weight, close to that of a cow, and you've got a strange, ancient alligator impersonator, or something like that. Thankfully, the adaptations did seem to work well enough for this salty croc. The flipper legs were complemented by a big tail ending in a fluke shape for some extra speed in the water, and at some point it's postulated that the Dacosaurus did indeed have a salt gland. Its big, serrated, laterally compressed teeth helped it take down all sorts of prey too. These dental features make people think it often went after larger prey. The flattened profile and extra strength in the bite would have made it possible to really crunch and munch some bigger numbers, as opposed to the more needle-like teeth of some other aquatic predators. However, the clumsy limbs mentioned earlier point to a slower peak speed than most. So, in all likelihood, the Dacosaurus took down its fair share of slower fish, shellfish, and squids. And maybe if it got lucky and found some slower lads, it ate some small marine reptiles too. Ain't nothing like a mouthful of watery lizard for breakfast, am I right? Maybe I'm spending too much time trying to relate to underwater species. There are plenty of theories as to how the Dacosaurus reproduced. Some say that based on their aquatic lifestyle, they performed live births out at sea, similar to dolphins or ichthyosaurs. Others claim that they lived life like turtles and made their way to land to lay some eggs. No Dacosaurus nests have been discovered as of yet, and thus the debate continues. Live birth would line up pretty well with the survivability and adaptability of crocodiles in general. They've been around forever regardless, and everywhere too. Dacosaurus remains have been found in Europe, North America, South America, and Russia. They got around. Good for them. And before we get into my hypotheses on what would happen had they not gone extinct, there's one more piece of info that my research turned out. The Dacosaurus is quite popular among Jurassic Park fans, especially those who play the mobile game. Apparently they're quite the powerhouse, and many people are happy to see them in their regular rotation. So if you are a big Dacosaurus user online, this one goes out to you. Alright, enough facts and figures, let's get hypothetical. And when we do that, we'll get fictional. Monstrously so. That's right, back to the Godzilla title. The reason that the Dacosaurus was given a name of a monster that was made up thousands of years after it went extinct is because of a discovery made recently. By 2005, we'd already had plenty of Godzilla movies. Mr. Zilla is a cultural phenomenon, an icon, a symbol. It's impossible to separate it from the monster movie culture at large, and honestly, from the dinosaur discourse too. Even with atomic breath and the ability to annihilate entire cities, lines between the fictional creature and real, discoverable dinos are often drawn. Nobody's ever seen a real live dinosaur, or in this case, ancient sea crocodile, so many of the illustrations and models that exist are purely based on educated guesses. Bone structures, food samples, descendants, the works. If the Dacosaurus hung around for the thousands of years required to not go extinct, our view of the prehistoric world might be a little different. Models and comparisons might change, but I think the most noticeable difference would be in the world of fictional monsters. Godzilla just couldn't be Godzilla. See, the Dacosaurus was originally named before Godzilla made its way to the big screen in 1954, and if it never went extinct, well, we wouldn't have had to discover it through fossils. Somebody would have seen it, named it, killed it, dissected it, wrote a book on it, and more. And that deep skull that earned it the Godzilla moniker in 2005 would be a more widely known feature. Therefore, I believe if someone wanted to make Godzilla in a world where the Dacosaurus was alive and well, the design and naming scheme would have changed. I don't know if I can come up with something as snappy and legendary as Gojira itself, but hey, somebody would. And then there would be the ripple effect, radiating outwards from the newly retooled King of Monsters. Mothra, Ghidorah, Ultraman, Super Sentai, all the way down to Cloverfield. All these iconic figures spawned from giant monster lore would be forever changed. There is no way that once Godzilla changed, they would just emerge the same as they did in our Dacosaurus timeline, butterfly effect and whatnot. Other than that, I think the world would be more or less the same if the Dacosaurus didn't go extinct. I mean, we'd have an answer to whether or not it laid eggs, and there'd be another crocodile out there to eat unattended toddlers. Floridians would just fry it up like popcorn chicken. Those folks love eating big old creatures.